Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode, we created our first instance and we also created a folder that will contain the project inside the machine itself. In this episode, we want to create our first script that will be some kind of endpoint. Now, one thing that can be confusing, especially if you are new to Linux, is the way we handle files. Because in Windows, everything is straightforward. You can actually see the file, you can right click on it and open it and edit it. In Linux, it's a bit more confusing because we don't have this graphical interface. But it's basically the same thing. We can create a file, we can edit it, we can save it, and then we can run it. So we are going to create a Python file, and right now we still don't have Python installed on this machine because this is a new machine, right? We just created the machine in the previous episode. We don't have anything on it. So we also need to install Python. But before we use the Python functionality, we can simply create the file. So in order to create a file, we can simply say nano, and this is a way to create a file. There are a few more ways to create a file, but we're going to use nano, and then we're going to give it a name. So we're going to say something like simple endpoint, and we also need to give it the extension. So for a Python file, we use py. And now when we press enter, it's going to create this file, but it's going to be an empty file. Now when we press on enter, this file is basically opened and we can edit. So we can write things into it and we can save it. So just so we know that there is something inside of this file, let's just say something like, this is an empty file. We can save it by pressing on Ctrl O. You can see it over here, write out. So Ctrl O. And now it gives us an opportunity to change the name. We don't want to, so we basically just press on enter. And then we press on Ctrl X to close this thing. We can see it over here, exit. So Ctrl X. And now we go back to our console. Now, we can go back into the file by simply typing nano simple endpoint again, and this will go into edit mode. But if we just want to see the content of this file, we can say cat, press enter, and it will print the content of this file over here, so we know that it was saved. Another small tip for Linux is that you don't have to write these commands all over again. You can simply go back to the previous command by pressing on up, and then it will autocomplete the last command. Then you can go back in time by pressing on up or down. So this will save you a lot of time instead of typing everything all over again. You also don't have to type the entire name of the file. You can simply type the first letter, for example S, and then press on tab and it will autocomplete. So if you have a bunch of files in this folder, you don't need to give it the full name. You can simply press on tab and it will find this file and it will autocomplete it. So now we have this file over here, but it's still not operational because we only have this simple comment inside. So now we are going to actually copy a full script inside. So for this, we're going to do the same thing, nano, and let's just delete all of this. Again, we can use up to go back, and we're going to press enter. It's going to open this again. And now we are going to simply delete this part over here. And we're going to paste the script that I'm going to provide to you in the description. You simply copy everything, right click to copy, and then you go into your console and you click over here on the right mouse button and you paste. And now it's going to paste this entire script, okay? And you can see it over here. So just make sure that it actually starts with these imports and it ends with this port connection, okay? Now, in order to save it, we are going to do the same thing. Ctrl O, enter, and then Ctrl X. And now if we do cat simple endpoint, we can see the entire content and it means that everything was saved. So now if we want to run this file, we have to use the Python command and specify the name of the Python file. But we don't have Python installed yet, so it's not going to work. And we can also see this, so let's do it again. It says Python command not found. It means that we don't have Python installed on this machine. So exactly like in Windows, we can install programs and then use them, and we don't have Python installed. So in order to install Python, we're going to use this command sudo yum install python 3 hyphen and pip. And now we're going to press on enter, and it's going to take some time. Also make sure you follow the commands over here. So is it okay? We press Y and enter again, and it will download a bunch of things. And now we have Python installed. And just to make sure, you can type in Python and press enter. And it's actually not Python, but Python 3. So let's say Python 3. And we can see the version, so we know that Python was installed. Now, because we used Python like this, we need to exit it. So we can simply type exit. And now we are back to our regular console. Now, if all of this bothers you and you want a clean slate, you can simply type clear, and now it will delete all of this and you will start with a fresh page. So now you can add more things. Let's just go down a bit. Now, if we are going to try to use Python to run our script, it's going to work, but we are going to get an error because we need to install one more thing. And if we use cat and we print the content and we go to the top, we can see that it uses these imports. So it basically uses different libraries to perform different things. Now again, you don't need to understand Python, but if you've been following my Unity tutorials and if you have some knowledge in programming in C#, it's basically the same thing. You remember that in C#, at the top of the script, we use different libraries. So the same way in Python, we use different libraries, and these are the libraries that we're using for this script. And you can see that we are importing a package or a library named Flask, okay? But we still don't have this installed. For the other ones, this JSON and this OS package, they are included in Python, but the Flask one is not included. So when we run this file, it's going to give us an error because we still don't have this installed. So we need to install Flask. And if you're wondering what Flask is basically a tool that is used to create websites or web applications with Python. And it can be like a foundation to your website. It will give you some basics to start with, and it's very lightweight and simple. And you can do basic things, but you can also expand and make more complicated things. But it's great for beginners because it's very simple. So again, you don't need to know a lot about it, but just know that this is a library that we're going to use for this script to create this endpoint. So we need to install it. So we're simply going to type in the command line pip 3 install Flask. And now it will take some time, and it may look like it was done installing, but there is some kind of thing here that you need to do it once again. So run it once again and just make sure that it was actually installed. And if you want to make sure that it's installed, you can simply type Flask -v, and this will basically check the version. So you can see that it did not find Flask. So maybe we can use another way to determine if Flask was installed. We can do pip3 show Flask, and we can see that it was actually installed. So the version command simply is not working. So now we have Flask installed and we can run our script. Now, before we run the script, let me just explain to you what it will do. So let's use again cat simple endpoint, and now it will print the entire content. So it will basically start a script that will create some kind of functionality on this machine. And again, you don't need to know Python, but we'll basically use this port 5001, and we'll run this script on this port. So when we try to connect to this port, we are going to basically be able to connect to these endpoints, and with these endpoints we can do whatever we want. So we are going to have this endpoint, and if you know about APIs and you used APIs before, it will basically be an API endpoint. So we can simply type in the entire URL of our machine. We can use then this 5001 port, and we can specify this endpoint. And if we use this /API/health endpoint, and we use the get request, then it will basically check the health of our server, and it will simply return this string saying server online, okay? And it will give us this 200 response code. If you don't know about APIs, I created a tutorial about it. I'm going to add a link to the description so you can watch it and you are going to understand about response codes and about APIs, but it's pretty straightforward. It's just a way to get data from the server, and this is exactly what we are doing over here. All we return is a string that will tell us that our server is online. Because imagine that you want to connect to this endpoint from a different machine. You don't really have this panel over here. You don't have a way to know that your machine is actually running, or maybe it's offline. So when we connect to it, we are going to be able to get this server online string and know that the machine is running. We are also going to have this endpoint, which is API/getData, and it will again use the get request, and we're going to be able to get a JSON file. So we are going to have a local JSON file that will be connected to this script, and each time we use this API call, it's going to give us this JSON file. Now, this is very important because it's already a foundation for some kind of server that we can use in Unity. We can use a JSON file for saving things, right? So we can have user data or even game data saved inside this JSON. And we're also going to have another endpoint, which will be set data, that uses a post request. So over here, we can send a JSON to our server, and it will basically save the JSON, okay? And then after this, we can do get data and get the same JSON. This is a very simple endpoint to get a JSON, to save a JSON, and to get the general status of our server, if it's online or not. So we are going to use Python 3 and the name of this file, simple endpoint. So it means that our script is actually running on this port. And if we try to connect to it, it will work. And you can also see that we can quit by pressing on Control-C. So as long as we don't quit, this will be available for the outside world. Now, at this point, we are still not going to be able to connect to it because we need to change something in the settings of our instance. So we are going to open our instance and we are going to scroll over here into the settings of the security. Now, the settings of the security allow us to set different ports and basically block ports or allow ports using different protocols. Now, again, I'm going into networking a bit, so you don't really need to know a lot about this, but in order to use this port, we need to open it for external connections. So in order to change these rules, also see that we have inbound rules and outbound rules. In order to connect to our machine, which is the inbound rules, we are only allowing port 22, which is the port used for SSH. As you saw, we can actually connect to our machine using SSH because we opened this port. But in order to open this port, this 5001 port, we need to add a new rule. So in order to add a new rule, we click over here on Launch Wizard, and then we click over here on Security Group. And over here, we click on Edit Inbound Rules. And now we can see that we only have access to this port 22 for SSH, and it allows all different IPs to connect to it. So we can also limit specific IPs. But now we want to open this port 5001, so we're going to add a rule, and we're going to specify port 5001. And again, we also want to allow all different addresses to connect to it, and we can use a specific protocol. For example, if we want to have some kind of web page, so we can use HTTPS or maybe something else, but we simply want to connect to it, so we're going to use custom TCP. We can also specify a full range, for example, 5005. So all of these ports from 5001 to 5005 will be opened, but we don't need it. We simply need one port, which is 5001. And again, if you have more scripts and more services, then you can change the port over here and specify another port, for example, 5002, and then just add 5002 over here in another rule, or even like this, okay? But we only need this one port. And if you don't know what a port is, in a very simple way, it's basically a door into your machine, okay? A door that someone over the internet can open and enter into your machine. So usually we want to close all the doors unless we need to keep it open. So we want to keep this 22 port open for SSH, but we also want to open this 5001 port for this API endpoint, okay? So now we're going to save this, and we're going to have this new rule. We can see it over here. So let's just use our public IP, this one. Press enter, and now we can see that we are connected to this endpoint because it says status server online, okay? And this is exactly what we should expect. Now we can also connect to this get data, but we still don't have any JSON file over here, so we're not going to get anything. We're probably going to get this string, no data available. So let's use get data. So we simply change this to get data, and no data available because we don't have any JSON available yet. So I don't know when you're going to watch the next episode. For now, we can just turn off our machine so we can close this script from running. Again, Control C. And now that this script is not running, we are not going to be able to connect to it. So even if I refresh, this will be unavailable because the script is not running anymore, okay? And this is why we also need a service to make it persistent. And now when we want to close everything, we basically want to close this machine, we can simply close this tab, and we can go over here to instances, we can select our instance and change the state to stop instance, and this will basically stop the instance. And as I told you, when you're not using it, when you don't want your server to be available, just stop it. So in the next episode, we're going to turn this script into a service, and this will basically allow the script to run as a process in the background, because this is usually the way we want a service to function, and especially in a server. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe. If you want, you can also leave a like for the algorithm, and I'll see you in the next episode.